Yo, what is going on YouTube? Welcome back to another video, and this is one that you all wanted to see, and I'm trying to keep it as short as possible. We are gonna talk today about how you set up your car to go fast on the F1 game. So it's not an ultimate open lobby setup guide, it's literally talking about understanding how the setups work on F1 2021 so you can dominate your leagues and destroy your friends online. Because that's what we all want to do, right? Be competitive and win. So let's have a look and not further talk about any kind of stuff. You know, we're just gonna jump in right with this default setup. So default setup, we all know it, 8.8, blah 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 blah. You all have it. Like it's nothing secret. So to take away the easy stuff, first of all, brake pressure. You will always run 100%. All the tips that I'm giving you are based off my experience on the game, what I've learned in F1 esports. So please take it into consideration that also I might have knowledge that might not be fully 100% accurate, because of course the setups are the most crucial part to find lap time. And we also haven't had the best setup all season. We actually struggled last year in F1 esports quite a bit. I think Silverstone was the only track where we actually had a really competitive setup. On the other ones, we sometimes had a decent one, but it was never really dominant, only on Silverstone. So yeah, 100% brake pressure is what we were running, for example, on every single track. So take it away, you know something from our esports setup. This is not a big secret. And we were also running 50% brake bias everywhere. That's simply because after the patch, like you remember at the beginning of the game, there was a lot of, like the brake bias mattered a lot to rotate the car. Like there was some unnatural sliding. So what Codemasters did is change what was initially, before the patch, 56% brake bias is now 50%. So before you could go even 6 clicks slower. So you basically cannot really lock up the rears. It's nearly impossible. So try and use 50% brake bias, 51 if you need to. Especially in a race situation, you can also use the brake bias to control your tire wear. Like if you notice that there's more rear tire wear than front tire wear, you kind of want to play around with the brake bias. So you kind of want the balanced car in terms of tire wear, because if you have more front tire wear, the rear will get more slippery. If you have less front tire wear, the rear will get more slippery and it will be tricky to control it on the power. And the opposite around, if you have more front tire wear than rear tire wear, the car will become like a boat. It will become super understeery and it's not a pleasure to drive that. So in general, 50%, especially in quali, you can run it anywhere. So let's take this away always. This is what I would always recommend in the brake section. Now let's talk about aerodynamics. Because aerodynamics changed a lot in F1 2021 compared to previous years. Previous years we were running sometimes like 1.8 or something like that. If you do this here, your car is literally just gonna become a boat and you will not have a great time on track. If you can, most of the time, you want to run a bit more front wing than rear wing. A click or 2 clicks of difference is usually what you're aiming for, and the rest is then managed by setup balance, like setting up the rest of the car, how you like it. The reason for that is you just want more rotation, but at the same time, if you have more front wing than rear wing, the rear will get a bit more slippery, and that's when especially the suspension and the transmission comes into play, and I will talk about that, how we are going to counter that. So let's say if you're running 10.8 somewhere, that is a good balance for a lot of rotation. If it's a bit too loose, maybe try 10.9 and then make the rest a bit more aggressive. You always want a bit more rotation, like the car should always not slide, but it should rotate in. Like there's a difference between rotation and sliding. Like sliding is when oversteer becomes unnatural, and rotation is when oversteer is still kind of intended. So you create a slide, but by intention, and you control it so you don't create too much tire temps and tire wear and whatsoever, or you don't make mistakes, if you know what I mean. Because rotation always gets you around the corner quicker. That's just how it works on the game. And usually also in real life, just a bit differently. But this doesn't apply to every single track. You can also have tracks where you, especially in the races, it can be recommended. But let's talk about quali setups first. In the races, for example, you sometimes want equal wings because it makes it just easier to drive. And then you're just reducing the front wing usually. But let's say you go for a gap of 2 clicks with the on-throttle diff. So what the differential is doing with on-throttle differential, so in both ways, the differential is just, if it's locked, the wheels are spinning, are forced to spin in the same amount. So like if it's unlocked, the wheels can spin freely. So let's say you go into a corner and the inner tire has to spin less than the outer tire because the outer tire has to travel further, whilst the inner tire is technically closer. Wait, no, then he has to spin more, right? My brain is currently confused, but you get what I mean. Like there's a different amount of the tires rotating depending on the corner type and where the car is going. So it's usually like one tire has to spin more, one tire has to spin less. And if it's locked, that means they are locked to spin in the exact same way. Like the tire that would spin more and further cannot. So it breaks traction. Like traction loss is more apparent. It's appearing just like more randomly. It's harder to control. So if the differential is open, let's say on throttle, it's easier to notice traction loss and control that. But if the differential is locked, the outright traction out of a corner will be higher on the game. So that's why you see most of the F1 esports drivers using 100 diff even in the rain, because you still get more outright traction out of a corner. And I guess that makes sense, right? Because the traction is just so overpowered with the 100 diff, it gains you so much, like in overall, that it's just not worth lowering it. If you lower it, you can literally hear your car spinning. So on throttle means if you're accelerating, off throttle is when you're coasting or when you're braking. And you would think, okay, Marcel, why are you not going for traction there? Because it's not on throttle. You just need a traction, like outright traction, when you're on the power. Off the throttle, remember my rotation speech, my motivational, inspirational rotation speech? That you want the rotation. So we are aiming for something between a maximum of 53. I personally don't really run 53 to 56 off throttle diff. So if your car is already naturally quite loose in terms of the suspension, the wings and whatever, but you like the rotation when you're on the throttle, but you feel like the rear is getting loose when you're braking or when you're off the throttle in a corner, mid corner, then increase it. Don't be shy, increase it to 56, maybe even 57, depends on you, but I would recommend you, like esports drivers, probably aim for something between 53 and 56. I think most probably between 54 and 56, something like that. Just because there's a big difference. You will feel that these couple of percentages, they make the car so much more unstable under braking and when lifting. And it gives you so much more rotation, so use this to figure out how to set up the car. But something like 55, 56, you never can really go wrong. 54 is already a bit more aggressive. 53 is really aggressive. So yeah, play around with that. You need to find, like a setup is not just about one section that will make it overpowered. It's the whole package. The whole package needs to be perfect so you can go quick. Let's talk suspension geometry. Right, left, left. It still works. I don't really see a reason to change it big time. I know there are some people that change it. I think this year some people were running something like mid rear camber. But usually this is literally the way to go. I can't even like tell right now because I haven't really setup tested for ages which thing does what, but this works. It just works, okay? To make it simpler, just use this. It will always be a nice baseline. And if you're getting that far into your setup testing, you can still adjust these settings and see if it does something or if it's maybe just more placebo. So use this as a base and then maybe try a bit around. Like toe usually increases the initial rotation, like turn-in, and camber is just about actual grip in corners and sometimes having a bit more understeer or oversteer. But it's not as, like you won't feel it as much as aerodynamics, transmission, or now the next important part, suspension. I always have my front suspension and front ARB on 1. That's rule number 1. And then you want a bit stiffer ARB, usually then suspension. For the right side, you can use 2.7, 1.7. That's kind of the thing that I would play around with. I think 1.7, you have a bit more understeer. But the car lacks a bit of rotation. Okay, it's weird because sometimes I felt like the one is giving me more understeer while still making the car looser. Because it kind of, technically it should lose you downforce because it's too low, so it makes the car looser. But at the same time, because it's too low, it's also lacking the downforce from the front end. Then it just understeers. With the ride height, I would just leave it on 7 on the rear and front 1 or 2. Just figure out what works best. 2 is technically also fast on the straight, or should be, and should be an overall more stable, but also more reactive from the front end. So it's kind of like a balance. Try around with that. Yeah, and with the rear suspension, you can go really aggressive, like we already have it in the ultimate open lobby setup guide. But I also like to try and lower the suspension because the suspension will give you outright traction. Like you will feel a difference. It will change the rotation of the car big time. But like if you have a really soft suspension, you will feel like you can be much more aggressive on power. There's a way less chance of losing the car. But at the same time, you will lose a lot of time in corners because you just don't have the rotation. Suspension is more about like the initial rotation. I feel like anti-rover is more about the high speed stations, like let's say Cops or the S's or whatever in Silverstone. So something between 2 and I would say 7 works here for the suspension. For the ARB, I would usually say something between probably 5 and probably 10. Something like that. Just play around with it, change it from track to track. And also, you always have to trim this according to your aerodynamics. That's really important because you can have a really, really stable car in terms of aerodynamics and like high speed, in terms of like low wings and whatever, but then have a lot of rotation from the suspension by going more aggressive. It's a thing of playing around. And you just have to get a feeling for it and figure out what works for you on which track. But those are the kind of ways how you're looking for to build a setup. And now the final part, tire pressures, for me a big question mark because I still don't fully understand it. I never really did. The only thing that I know, more tire pressures means less tire wear. And yes, a lot of you will say, hey Marcel, but shouldn't higher tire pressure also increase the tire temperature? Technically, yes, you're right with that. And that should also increase tire wear. But it doesn't. Like, it increases tire temperature to some extent, yes. But there's still way less tire wear than if you wouldn't do it. So do it for races, especially in quali. It's not as important. You could technically run in quali the standard tire pressure. I think it's 22.2 and 23.1. You could literally run that every single time in qualifying. On some races probably too, but you will have way more tire wear. So you have to check for the races how you can set up the tires so you have as minimal wear and also as balanced as possible in terms of front and rear end. If you have less pressure on the rear, it just feels weird. So I would always have it higher. If you have less tire pressures on the front, I feel like the car is getting a bit more reactive. Like if you have it higher, it becomes slippery, but it becomes kind of understeery slippery. If you have it down there, it becomes also slippery, but it's more like an oversteery kind of feeling. I don't know. Like it feels like the car turns more. You can gain more lap time by having lower tire pressures on the front, I feel like. But long term, it's probably more beneficial. You can still set up a car really quick with maximum pressures. So try and go as high as possible. Play around with that. It will also change the feel of the car, like I said. And that also has then again to do with your suspension and everything else. So it's kind of a little toolbox, like a little sandbox where you're having to figure out what works for you. But I gave you now the tools for qualifying and also with that for the race. The only thing that I want to mention for the race, always lower the suspension a bit or the ARB if you want to make it a bit more stable. Or lower the wings because you want as minimum downforce as possible to overtake, but still you need downforce to stay close in the corner, so it's a compromise. Also, more downforce means more ERS usage because you're longer full throttle, that means more ERS is being used. Keep that in mind for less ERS consumption. and more strategic way of racing. So sometimes maybe having a little bit less downforce is better, so you can strategically use your ERS to become faster when it matters for undercutting, overcutting, something like that, strategic, or overtaking, or defending, whatever. So yeah, that's about it for this. In the wets, this still applies similar, like the tire pressures. The suspension as well. You can increase the ride height a bit. I don't know. I don't remember how we did that in the wets. I think you can also check out time trial setups for each track, what the world record setup is, and kind of maybe copy or have a look how the ride height is there. But I think you can also run a normal ride height. Usually in the wets, you can even increase the ARB a bit. And also the suspension, because you usually run a more like positive, like usually a bit less front wing than usual. Sometimes even something like that. And one more thing to add for tracks where you're really rear limited, even in the dry, like for example Portimao, it can be beneficial to actually run something like 9-10. Like tracks where you struggle with rear temperatures, sometimes it can help to run either same level of wings or a bit more rear wing than front wing. That's pretty much it, guys. I thought this video would be much shorter. 17 minutes, holy crap. Sorry for that. I hope we can maybe cut it a bit shorter, but I believe this might have to stay a bit raw. Sorry, but this is really, if you watch it until the end, you will have learned a lot by that, and I hope these kind of tips should kind of direct you, navigate you where you should build your setup, will help you to become a better driver on F1 2021. I will of course also bring something out for that early, actually 2022, like an initial impression from what I can share without sharing too many secrets because of F1 esports, of course. I hope you liked this video. In case you did, please share it with your mates if you want them to get faster, or if you know someone that needs a bit of setup help. Also give it a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you don't miss out on any videos, please. It helps me a lot. And also check out the socials. I'm streaming on Twitch a lot. You could see the notification earlier. And also Instagram, please check out Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, whatever. Usually more active on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok. So yeah, see you around, guys. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed it. Peace.